I was on my back porch, sipping black coffee, watching the morning light stretch across the fields when my phone began buzzing. The name on the screen made my heart sink. Liz Stevens, the HOA president. She never called me for anything pleasant. Over the years, I'd gotten used to her requests, demands, and outright threats that my property didn't meet community standards. But today, the call felt different. Urgent. I didn't answer. Instead, I let it ring out while I savor my coffee. Lately, my nerves have been on a hair trigger from dealing with the Homeowners Association, and I was in no mood to indulge Liz's newest obsession. My property was unique. I'd inherited a modest acreage on the outskirts of the subdivision, complete with an old-fashioned water well my grandfather had dug decades ago. The property had originally been farmland before the area was converted into a neighborhood with large lots. Although my home was under the HOA's purview, barely by a quarter-mile stretch, I never had any complaints about my well or how I chose to maintain it. Until recently, Liz's second call arrived a few minutes later than a text. I glanced at it. Your well is an eyesore. Please camouflage or remove it. It was only 7:30 in the morning, and her imperious tone already made my blood boil. But what caught my attention wasn't the usual demand. It was the final word, remove. That well was a lifeline, especially for someone like me who preferred independence from municipal water lines and the ever-looming threat of rising water bills. Frustrated, I tossed the phone onto the patio table and got up to check the well itself. The wooden cover was old but sturdy. My grandfather had built it with cedar planks. The roof perched above the stone circumference, giving it a rustic storybook charm. Sure, it had some wear and tear, but it wasn't anything a fresh coat of paint or minor repairs couldn't fix. Not exactly an eyesore, at least not in my eyes. Just as I neared the well, I spotted a figure power walking across my lawn. It was her, Karen Baker, the newly elected HOA secretary, a self-proclaimed enforcer of the association's rules. She'd earned a reputation around the neighborhood for nitpicking everything from mailbox height to flower bed arrangements. If something was off by half an inch, she'd be on your doorstep with a clipboard. She was unstoppable, and rumor had it that she aimed for Liz's position as HOA president next year. Good morning, Karen. I greeted with forced politeness. She wore a pastel pantsuit and her trademark scowl, clearly disapproving of my property layout. What can I do for you? She ignored my greeting, propping her hands on her hips. Have you seen the new guidelines? Water wells are strictly regulated in this community. We'll need immediate compliance, or we'll issue citations. She tapped her phone, presumably pulling up some official-sounding text. Your well is unsafe and unattractive. 2 violations in one. I took a steadying breath. Look, my well is grandfathered in. It predates the HOA, and I've updated it regularly. The county inspector checks it every year, and it's perfectly safe. She offered a thin smile, revealing that under her polite veneer, she was brimming with hostility. That's not for you to decide. We have new standards, and if you can't meet them, you'll have to seal it up or remove it entirely. This was the same old argument with an extra dash of arrogance. But I noticed a gleam in Karen's eyes, a cunning that suggested she had more in mind than just a simple rule enforcement. Something was off. She seemed almost too eager to see my well destroyed. Any particular reason you're so invested in my well? I asked, crossing my arms. She squared her shoulders. Don't take it personally. I'm just doing my job. You have 1 week to comply, or the HOA will take action. After she left, I stood by the well, fuming. Seal it up? Not in a million years. This was my family's property, a piece of heritage. I might have been more open to compromise if the HOA approached me respectfully, but Karen's approach was as subtle as a hammer to the skull. The rest of the day, I thought about how to respond. I considered calling an attorney friend of mine, Erica, who specialized in property disputes. But this was the HOA, a group infamous for entangling homeowners in endless red tape. Even if I could win legally, the process could be excruciating and expensive. In the meantime, they might levy fines or, worse, sabotage my property. That night, though, something told me that Karen's threat wasn't idle. So I took extra precautions. I set up a few trail cameras near the well, hidden amidst bushes. Just a hunch, but given how brazen Karen was, I had a gut feeling she might try something more direct. My instincts weren't wrong. 2 nights later, as I reviewed the camera footage, grainy images captured under faint moonlight, I saw a silhouette creeping towards the well. Slender figure, hair pulled tight, rummaging with something bulky in hand. She tested the well's cover, tried to nudge it open, then scurried away as if spooked by a car passing down the road. A chill ran down my spine. Karen was up to no good, and this was more than a simple dispute about compliance. She hadn't come to reason, and she certainly didn't intend to follow due process. That's when I decided, if she wants a fight, let's make it a fair one. I phoned Erica, told her the basics, and we began planning. I wouldn't just defend my well, I'd set a trap. Because if Karen Baker wanted to destroy my property, she might very well walk headfirst into a legal snare I'd carefully prepare. Little did I know, the escalation would be far worse than I imagined. But that first glimpse of her lurking at night taught me one lesson. There are some people who can't be reasoned with. You have to show them exactly what happens when they cross the line. That weekend, I officially fired the opening salvo. I placed a large sign next to the well, reading, "Under surveillance. No trespassing." It was a bold move, practically daring Karen or any of her HOA cronies to try something. But I knew I needed to apply pressure. If I simply waited in fear, they'd outmaneuver me with citations, compliance orders, or surreptitious acts in the dead of night. To support my strategy, I gave a local contractor a call. Frank was an expert in well and pump maintenance, and I asked him to do a thorough inspection of my system. We documented everything with photos and logs. The well structure, its water quality, the absence of any hazards. I wanted an official record in case the HOA tried to claim it was unsafe. Frank gave my well a glowing report. That would be crucial evidence if I ended up in a legal showdown. Meanwhile, Erica, my attorney friend, suggested that I quietly gather more intel on the HOA's bylaws. "You can't rely on them playing fair," she said. "If they're setting you up, you need to know exactly what clauses they might use against you." So I spent hours combing through thick, jargon-laden documents that governed our neighborhood. It was mind-numbing but worth it. Buried deep in the text was a peculiar clause. Certain structures predating the formation of the HOA may qualify for grandfathered status, assuming they do not pose a verifiable health or safety risk. That was my golden ticket. If I could definitively prove my well didn't pose a verifiable risk, the HOA couldn't force me to remove it. The next few days passed uneventfully, too quietly, in fact. I half expected Karen to come marching up my driveway again, but she was nowhere to be found. I stewed in uneasy anticipation, suspecting she was waiting for the right moment. My guess was confirmed late one night, around 2 a.m., when my trail cameras pinged me with movement alerts. I watched the live feed from my phone. There she was again. Karen, in dark clothing, creeping across my lawn with a large bucket clutched to her chest. My heart hammered in my ears as I saw her prying at the well cover. She wrestled it open a crack, just wide enough to fit the bucket's contents, and tipped it over. By the grainy black and white footage, it looked like she was dumping something coarse and chunky. The motion camera angle caught a glimpse. It resembled wet gravel or cement mix. She nudged the cover back in place, then dashed off, leaving me stunned. Seconds later, I was slipping into my boots, grabbing a flashlight, and heading out the back door. By the time I reached the well, Karen was gone, but a fresh spatter of gray sludge around the cover confirmed my worst fears. She'd dumped concrete mixed straight into my well. Outrage flared in my chest. Even if it didn't harden fully, it could damage the pump, clog the pipes, or contaminate the water supply. This was a brazen act of vandalism, one that I had on camera. I wanted to call the police immediately, but Erica had warned me to be strategic. We needed an airtight case. So I took photos of the debris, then lifted the cover carefully and took a few more. The acrid smell of wet cement stung my nostrils. My phone flashlight revealed lumps of cement swirling in the water below. If the pump was running, it might pull in that mixture and ruin the motor. I turned off the pump at the breaker in my garage, then placed a quick call to Frank the contractor to see if he could come first thing in the morning. Next, I forwarded the camera footage to Erica. She texted back, "This is perfect. We'll have evidence of criminal damage." Her advice, call the authorities, but hold off on pressing charges until we had a complete repair estimate. That way, we'd have a full picture of the damages. Morning came, and Frank arrived with a vacuum pump and specialized equipment. We carefully removed as much of the concrete mix as possible. It was a messy process, but surprisingly, the well's depth and the ongoing water infiltration meant the cement hadn't fully set. We managed to vacuum out most of the sludge and flush the rest. Frank replaced a filter, checked the pump. Miraculously, it still functioned, though we found sand and grit lodged in the intake. By noon, I had a thorough, itemized invoice. Damage filtration system, specialized cleaning potential long-term damage. Erica recommended I file a formal police report and request they interview Karen. She'd be faced with potential charges of vandalism or criminal mischief, both serious. My anger simmered, but I also felt a quiet sense of victory forming. She walked right into the trap. The cameras, the thorough documentation, the well inspection proof that it was safe. This was ironclad evidence that the HOA's supposed hazard was actually her own creation. Still, I knew the fight wasn't over. Karen was vindictive, and the HOA might circle the wagons to protect her. Liz Stevens, the HOA president, would likely defend her star enforcer. I could imagine their spin. Karen was just trying to fix a hazardous well, or she was performing an emergency measure to seal it for safety. But with the footage capturing her stealthy approach at 2 a.m., those excuses would fall flat. Sure enough, the next day, I got a call from an Officer Henderson of the local police. He asked me to come down to the station to provide a statement. He'd seen the footage and spoken briefly with Karen, who claimed she was preventing a public danger by sealing the well. The officer's tone told me he didn't fully buy her story, but he had to play by procedure. I showed up with Erica, plus Frank's invoice and my prior well inspection results. Henderson nodded gravely. "This is quite a bit of evidence," he said. "If the district attorney moves forward, Karen could face criminal charges." While it felt good to see her squirm, I also realized how quickly these situations can escalate. If Karen was cornered, she might lash out. Erica assured me that we'd file a civil suit if necessary, too, covering the repair costs and possibly punitive damages. But we had to be cautious. The HOA would surely jump in, and I had a feeling Karen wouldn't go down without a fight. That night, though, I allowed myself a small moment of satisfaction. I made a pot of tea, sat on my porch, and stared up at the stars. My well was safe for the time being, no thanks to her sabotage. I caught her in the act, and I had the law on my side. Let the HOA squabble and spin their tails. At least now, the playing field felt a little more even. But then my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You messed with the wrong people. You'll regret this." A chill rippled through me. It seemed Karen wasn't done, and neither was whoever else backed her. The following week was a blur of legal forms, back-and-forth phone calls, and uneasy glances over my shoulder. Erica filed a cease and desist letter to the HOA on my behalf, demanding they suspend any enforcement actions against my well until the criminal investigation wrapped up. Meanwhile, the police kept me updated. Officer Henderson said they'd presented the evidence to the DEA, who was strongly considering charges against Karen. Despite my simmering anger, I started worrying about potential retaliation. Karen was known for her rigid devotion to HOA rules, but the midnight sabotage revealed a darker streak, someone willing to trespass and cause real harm. And that ominous text message hinted I might be dealing with more than just a single rogue neighbor. Could others in the HOA be involved? One afternoon, I decided to walk the neighborhood. Sometimes, an old-fashioned conversation reveals more than any official statement. I visited a couple of older residents on my street, folks who'd had run-ins with Karen in the past. Mrs. Porter, a widow in her 70s, told me Karen had once threatened to fine her for having too many lawn ornaments. Then there was Bill Walters, a retired teacher, who recalled how Karen insisted he remove his bird feeder because it attracted pests. She seemed to relish the power of enforcement. Interestingly, both Mrs. Porter and Bill mentioned how Karen bragged about connections in local government, specifically with the zoning office. That might explain her swagger and fearlessness. She believed she could do anything without repercussions. I felt a flicker of doubt. Even with strong evidence, could she wriggle out of charges? My worries deepened when I returned home to find a bright orange notice taped to my front door. Property violation, non-compliant water structure. Deadline for removal, 10 days. I crumpled the notice in my fist, half tempted to tear it into tiny pieces. But I forced myself to read it thoroughly first. The notice was signed by Liz Stevens, with an appended note. If the well isn't removed or sealed, the HOA will undertake corrective action. I felt my blood pressure skyrocket. This was blatant intimidation. They knew I had evidence against Karen, so they were doubling down, threatening to forcibly seal my well. I suspected their timeline was orchestrated to outrun any criminal case, figuring they'd fix the problem before the law caught up with them. I immediately forwarded the violation notice to Erica. Within an hour, she responded, "This is textbook harassment. I'll file for a temporary restraining order to stop them from doing anything. But be prepared for a fight." Part of me wanted to pack up and leave, sell this headache of a property, and move somewhere else. But my family's history here ran deep, and the principle of the matter burned hot in my gut. Why should I be the one to leave just because an overzealous HOA crony decided to break the law? No, I'd stay and see this through. The tension escalated a few days later when I received a visit from an unexpected ally, an HOA board member named Simone. She was soft-spoken, clearly nervous. We sat on my porch while she explained that not everyone on the board supported Karen's actions. "There are rumors going around," Simone confided, eyes darting. "Karen is forging citations without a proper vote from the board. Liz is either complicit or turning a blind eye. Most of us never saw that violation notice before it went out." I stared at her, stunned. "So you're saying Karen might be acting alone? Or with just Liz's blessing?" Simone nodded. "Karen's determined to remove your well, but no one really knows why. She's telling everyone it's a dangerous eyesore. I think she has personal reasons for wanting it gone. And now that she might face criminal charges, she's desperate. If you can prove Karen's forging documents, it could unravel her whole position." This was the first real crack in the HOA's armor. I thanked Simone, urging her to be cautious. If Karen found out she'd talked to me, Simone could be targeted. After she left, I realized we might have enough leverage to expose Karen's entire operation, especially if some of these official notices lack the required board signatures or were created outside proper protocol. Erica agreed. "We'll demand the HOA produce all records related to your violation. If they can't, or if the documents are clearly forged, that's a big problem for them." Meanwhile, the clock ticked toward the 10-day deadline. The threat loomed. If I didn't remove the well, the HOA would try. I envisioned them showing up with sledgehammers or more cement. The notion of them physically destroying my grandfather's well made my stomach churn. But I had to trust Erica's legal approach and my own preparations. The trail cameras stayed rolling. I even added a backup camera disguised in a birdhouse. On the 7th day, I got a frantic call from Officer Henderson. Karen's turned herself in for questioning. She insists she was acting under HOA orders. She also tried to shift blame, saying you threatened her. "We don't see any evidence of that, but we need you to come down and give an updated statement." So Karen was pivoting to a new defense. I was just following orders. My gut twisted in anger. She was the one who dumped concrete in my well. Yet she had the nerve to claim self-defense or obedience to some imaginary directive. I went to the station, repeated my account of the sabotage, and provided Simone's name as a board member who could verify the HOA's official stance. By the time I left the station, I felt exhaustion settle in my bones. Fighting the HOA was more than a bureaucratic battle. It was a psychological siege. Every day, a new twist or new intimidation tactic. But now that Karen was under investigation, the dynamic might shift. If she was desperate enough to lie about the board's orders, she might slip up further. Still, the The threat of forced well removal lingered. Days ticked by with no official word from the HOA on whether they'd back down. My phone kept buzzing with texts from neighbors, some supportive, others cautious, a few repeating rumors that Harold threatened Karen. Yet there was a faint sense of hope. If we could show that Karen forged documents or abused her position, the entire violation notice would be null and void. The question was, would that happen before they made good on their threat? By the 8th day, I was a bundle of nerves, half expecting bulldozers or a demolition crew to show up unannounced. Instead, I got a surprising call from Liz Stevens. Her voice sounded unnaturally cordial. "Harold," she said, "the HOA board would like to meet with you to discuss a resolution. Something amicable, so we can all move forward." I didn't trust her one bit, but I was curious. If they were suddenly offering a friendly meeting, it might mean they realized their position was crumbling. I agreed to a meeting in public, specifically a local coffee shop known for its big windows and foot traffic. Safety in numbers. Erica came with me, and we sat across from Liz, who arrived wearing a sharp blazer and an even sharper expression. She started with a rehearsed apology. "We're sorry for any misunderstanding. We just want what's best for the neighborhood. And, well, Karen may have overstepped." "Overstepped," I repeated, incredulous. "She vandalized my well, dumped concrete in it. I have video evidence. That's beyond overstepping." Liz's mouth twitched, revealing a flicker of frustration. "We can't control individual board members' late-night activities, Harold. The HOA itself never instructed her to do that." Erica seized the moment. "So you're stating for the record that the HOA did not order Karen to dump concrete in my client's well? That she acted on her own?" Liz hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, that's correct. But the well is still a concern for us. Our guidelines require all water sources to meet certain aesthetic and safety standards. We're willing to drop the removal order if you agree to some modifications, like a new cover or decorative siding that aligns with neighborhood appearance codes. We can call it a day and avoid further conflict." I glanced at Erica, who gave a slight shrug, indicating we should hear her out. I already had no problem with upgrading the cover or painting it. My main gripe was with the forced removal, but I wanted to see how they'd handle compensation for the damage Karen caused. What about the damage to my well system, the cleanup costs, and the potential legal repercussions for Karen? I asked, full to my arms. Liz's eyes flicked to Erica. "We, as the HOA, can't be held responsible for Karen's alleged actions. That's a private matter between the two of you." Erica leaned forward. "Actually, if it's proven Karen was using her HOA authority, falsely or otherwise, the board could be implicated under vicarious liability, especially if internal communications show any encouragement or tacit approval of her plan." Liz paled slightly. I'm sure that won't be necessary. Let's remain civil. We'll drop any citations if you sign an agreement to keep the well up to standard." She pulled out a folder with typed documents. "We can handle this right now." I skimmed the contract. It was a small concession from their initial posture, but it lacked any mention of the damage Karen inflicted. Erica politely pointed out the omission. Liz offered a forced smile. "There's no consensus on the board about restitution. I'm afraid that's your personal lawsuit against Karen, not the HOA's domain." At that point, I realized their olive branch was purely self-serving. They were trying to distance themselves from Karen and bury the incident. I glanced at Erica, who nodded. It was time to apply the final blow. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a letter, a formal notice of intent to sue not just Karen, but the HOA as well for damages, harassment, and potential forgery of official documents. Liz's jaw dropped. "Why you can't do that?" Erica's expression remained calm. "We can and we will. Unless you're prepared to sign a settlement acknowledging Karen's wrongdoing and compensating Mr. Collins for the cleanup costs. Also, the HOA must retract any violation notices pertaining to the well and formally uphold his grandfathered exemption." A tense silence followed. Liz fumbled with the folder of documents, her cheeks reddening. She muttered something about needing to consult the rest of the board. Erica slid her a business card. "Take your time. We'll be waiting." A few days later, an official letter arrived, this time with the full board signatures. They agreed to rescind the violation notice, confirm my well's exempt status, and reimburse me for Frank's cleanup invoice. As for Karen, the HOA distanced themselves from her entirely, claiming they'd had no prior knowledge of her nighttime trespass. The last line of the letter read, "We sincerely apologize for any inconvenience." Hollow words, but a win nonetheless. Shortly thereafter, the police announced that Karen would be charged with misdemeanor property damage, possibly upgraded to a felony if the DA deemed it warranted. Word spread through the neighborhood that Karen planned to fight it in court, but her position on the HOA board had become untenable. She resigned in disgrace. In the midst of all this, Simone, my unexpected ally, quietly informed me that Karen had indeed been forging some documents, forging signatures of board members who were either absent or never voted. That sealed Karen's fate. If she lied about official HOA directives, the DA had an even stronger case. Ultimately, I never saw Karen again. She moved out of the neighborhood within a few months, presumably to avoid further scrutiny. As for my well, I did exactly what I'd intended all along. Fixed it up, gave the cover a fresh coat of weatherproof paint, and installed a discreet camera that captured any approach. For my own peace of mind, I made sure the pump was well protected against any future sabotage. Life gradually returned to normal, or as normal as it could be in an HOA-run neighborhood. But I'd proven that sometimes the best defense against petty tyrants is a strategic offense. Catch them in the act, document everything, and be prepared to stand your ground with legal backing. On quiet evenings, I'd still stand by that old cedar cover, remembering my grandfather who built it with pride. I felt a mix of relief and lingering bitterness. Sure, I'd won the battle, but the experience left a mark. The scowl on Karen's face that night, the realization she was willing to sabotage someone's water supply, it taught me that some people see rules and power as weapons, not responsibilities. Yet in the end, she walked right into my legal bait, and that was enough to preserve my well and my peace of mind. Even if I never fully understood her motives, I did learn a valuable lesson. When push comes to shove, protecting what's yours might just mean building your own fortress of documents, cameras, and unwavering resolve. That might not be the most heroic image, but sometimes real heroism is refusing to be bullied into surrendering your heritage and your water supply to someone else's twisted agenda. The end.